Hey guys, tonight's archaeological site of human confused behavior, we will travel back to a magical era when there was no mobile phone signal, but human imagination was surfing 5G, the Middle Ages. Medieval Europe was an era of no craziest, only crazier, when modern people are still worrying about how to design a more humane prison. Medieval torture designers are already thinking, how to make pain more lasting, how to make death more artistic. As a result, batches of practical and curious torture instruments were born. They are not only punishment tools, but also the pinnacle of human pain aesthetics. Imagine, in a gloomy castle basement, a group of torture designers, wearing pointed hats and beards long enough to be brooms, are passionately brainstorming around a barrel of sour malt liquor. My friends, if the ribs are transformed into a harp, can the prisoner play do re mi when he screams? Why not try to transform the Iron Maiden into a double version? Buy one get one free, and couples can get discounts when they are tortured. Welcome to the Apple Conference of Medieval Torture Instruments. The innovation here can make modern people immediately thank their bosses after watching it. $9.96 is really a blessing. Today, let's talk about some of the representative works and guarantee that you will have a new understanding of the word human nature after watching it. Now please cooperate with the following actions to get an immersive experience. First, we have to dim the lights and pretend that we are prisoners in the dungeon for the 33rd day. Then turn on the electric fan and feel the castle VIP through-hall wind mixed with blood and mold. Finally, please hold your milk tea tightly, which is your last bond with the civilized world. Warm reminder, this train has no brakes. The imagination of medieval people is steeper than the steps of the Tower of London. Take 3 deep breaths and experience the fresh air of the Middle Ages. 50% rotten meat plus 50% feces. Next, fasten your seat belts and welcome to the darkest but most shining chapter of human creativity. In the luxury family bucket of medieval torture instruments in Europe, the Iron Maiden is definitely the best of the best. This upright Gothic metal coffin, with dense spikes inlaid on the inner wall, can be called the most subtle killing device in Europe. After all, the victim is not brutally beheaded or hanged, but gently closed, and then slowly enjoys the VIP treatment of nails piercing the body. In Nuremberg, Germany in the 16th century, a group of torture designers with deeper ideas than the dungeon, probably on a dark and windy night, chewing moldy black bread, while passionately discussing, "Brothers, beheading is too rough, and hanging is not elegant enough. Can we come up with a method of execution that is both beautiful and practical? Why not change the coffin to a vertical one and add some nails inside? Great! This way it can be reused, environmentally friendly and economical." So the Iron Maiden was born and quickly became popular in Europe, becoming the favorite of nobles and the Inquisition in various countries. Its design concept can be called death aesthetics, solemn on the outside, murderous on the inside, perfectly interpreting what gentle on the surface, deadly on the inside means. The inspiration for this torture device remains an unsolved mystery. Historians have put forward several outrageous but reasonable speculations. It may be a revenge creation of a designer after being pricked by a hedgehog. It may also be a hug device that can never be refused, ordered by a nobleman after his love proposal was rejected. Others believe that this is just a creative upgrade of ordinary coffins by medieval craftsmen, adding a little ritual sense to death. Regardless of where the inspiration comes from, the use of the Iron Maiden is extremely simple, which can be called a fool-style execution. First, stuff the prisoner in. If the prisoner is too large, you may need an assistant to help adjust the posture. Then slowly close the iron door. In order to allow the nail to penetrate accurately, the closing speed must be just right. Too fast will lose elegance. Too slow will affect the viewing. Finally, listen to the prisoner's screams and calculate how many layers of internal organs the nail has penetrated. This is simply a medieval version of the human anatomy practice class. It is worth noting that the arrangement of the nails of the Iron Maiden is not random, but scientifically designed, deliberately avoiding vital parts to prolong the pain. Some nails are short and blunt, only piercing the skin. Some are long and sharp and can directly penetrate the internal organs. This progressive torture allows prisoners to stay awake for minutes or even hours, fully experiencing the despair of the death countdown. What's even more amazing is that the Iron Maiden also has an adjustable function. The nails can be disassembled to accommodate prisoners of different sizes. This is simply a medieval version of customized service, which fully reflects the German craftsman spirit. Hundreds of years later, these once terrifying torture instruments have long since withdrawn from the stage of history, but they have not disappeared, but have transformed into internet celebrity exhibits in museums. Tourists line up to take pictures and even make scissor hands, as if they are participating in some weird, medieval theme park. This strong contrast just reveals the wonderful attitude of human beings towards pain. When medieval people tortured prisoners with the Iron Maiden, they thought it was a just judgment, while modern people took selfies in front of the same device, with the text "Today is also a day pierced by life." Pain and humor, just like this, have completed a seamless connection across the long river of time for 500 years. In contemporary popular culture, the image of the Iron Maiden appears frequently. From horror movies to the logo of heavy metal bands, it has long since departed from the original meaning of torture instrument and evolved into a symbol of a certain dark aesthetics. Some couples even joke, "If you dare to cheat, I will put you in the Iron Maiden." Look, even the threat of death can be played as a meme by modern people. This cultural change across time and space can't help but make people sigh at the amazing adaptability and sense of humor of human beings. If the horror of the Iron Maiden lies in its slowness and ritual sense, then the medieval people are obviously not satisfied with this. They also need some more efficient torture instruments, such as the Judas Cradle, a device that allows prisoners to experience the pleasure of ascension in a few seconds. This torture instrument that pursues instant feedback shows another creepy creativity of the medieval people. From slow torture to instant pain, the medieval torture instrument designers used their amazing imagination to leave an alternative encyclopedia of human pain for future generations. In the dark dungeons of medieval Europe, the creativity of torture designers seemed to have no limit. When the Iron Maiden got tired of the gentle embrace and the gallows seemed too mediocre, a genius or madman had an idea. Why not hang the prisoner, but without a rope? Thus, one of the most frightening torture instruments in history, the Judas Cradle, was born. This name, which sounds quite childish, actually hides horrifying cruelty. Imagine, in a damp and cold dungeon, a 2-meter-high metal pyramid cone stands tall, and the tip of the cone flashes cold light under the illumination of torches. The prisoner is stripped of his clothes, his hands are tied behind his back, and then he is slowly lifted up by a pulley system and hovers just above the tip of the cone. The judge might ask hypocritically, "Do you have anything else to confess?" Just as the prisoner racked his brains to defend himself, the rope suddenly loosened. Ah! With a heart-wrenching scream, the prisoner's body was smashed hard against the sharp metal cone under the action of gravity. The tip of the cone would first pierce the perineum, then go all the way up, penetrate the rectum and abdominal cavity, and some particularly lucky prisoners would even be pierced out of the mouth by the tip of the cone. This is simply the medieval version of human skewer, except that the ingredients are living people. Although the whole process only takes a few seconds, the pain caused is enough to make people unforgettable for a lifetime, if they can still survive. The name of this torture device is also quite ironic. Judas is a traitor who betrayed Jesus, and the warm name of Cradle is probably because the victim will curl up on the cone like a baby in the end, of course, in the most painful way. Historical records show that this torture device was particularly favored by the Spanish Inquisition and was specifically used to deal with stubborn heretics. The effect was indeed immediate. After all, when you have a big iron spike stuck in your lower body, you really don't have the energy to stick to your beliefs. Even more outrageous, some deluxe Judas Cradles are equipped with a variety of value-added services. Some will heat the metal cone, allowing the prisoner to enjoy the pleasure of teppanyaki while being pierced. Some will smear honey or salt on the cone to attract rats in the dungeon to gnaw the wound. And some will place charcoal fire under the prisoner, turning the entire torture device into a human barbecue grill. These intimate designs fully demonstrate the ingenuity of medieval torturers. From a technical point of view, the design of the Judas Cradle is exquisite. The angle of the cone is precisely calculated to ensure that it will not be fatal immediately, but will let the prisoner die slowly in extreme pain. Some records show that prisoners may survive in this state for hours or even days. The height of the cone can also be adjusted to control the speed of falling and the depth of puncture, just like the intensity adjustment function of modern torture instruments. This customizable torture method fully reflects the professionalism of medieval torturers. Interestingly, this torture instrument has different variants in different regions. In Italy, it is called the Judas chair. In Germany, it has evolved into a thorn seat with multiple spikes. And in France, some versions will carve patterns on the cone, making this killing tool look more like a work of art. This regional difference is just like the localization strategy of modern fast food restaurants in different countries. From a psychological perspective, the horror of the Judas Cradle lies not only in the physical pain, but also in the psychological deterrence it brings. When the prisoner is hung up, he can clearly see the spikes waiting for him below. The fear brought by this death countdown is often more devastating than the actual physical torture. Many prisoners have already become mentally ill before being put down. This is probably the earliest psychological tactics. Hundreds of years later, this once terrifying torture device has become a frequent guest in popular culture. In the game Assassin's Creed, it is an assassination prop. On the album cover of a heavy metal band, it is a symbol of rebellion. In film and television works, it often appears as a symbol of ultimate torture. And in the jokes of netizens, it has become an exaggerated metaphor for when you sit on a bottle opener of red wine that you forgot to put away. This transformation from horror to entertainment precisely demonstrates the powerful psychological adjustment ability of human beings. Medieval people used it to maintain their beliefs, but modern people use it as a joke. Perhaps this is the progress of civilization. When the horror of the past becomes a joke today, it shows that we have indeed come a long way. In the museum, the smiles on the faces of tourists when they take pictures of the Judas Cradle may be the best irony of this dark history. However, the Judas Cradle leaves us with much more to think about. It reminds us how far human nature can degenerate when power is unconstrained. It warns us that cruelty in the name of nobleness is often more terrible than naked violence. It also makes us understand that the progress of civilization is never linear, but a process full of twists and turns and repetitions. In the field of contemporary medicine, the legacy of the Judas Cradle continues in another form. Medical methods such as rectoscopy and gynecological examination can be said to be the civilized version of this terrifying torture device to some extent. It's just that the metal probes now can be disinfected and anesthetized, and the doctor will gently say, "It may be a little uncomfortable." This contrast may best reflect the progress of human civilization. From a more macro perspective, torture devices such as the Judas Cradle are not only a tool of torture, but also a symbol of power display. It conveys a clear message to the people. This is the fate of those who resist authority. This method of maintaining rule through public execution was common in ancient society. Today, although we no longer use such naked violence, the way of displaying power still exists in various forms. It is worth mentioning that the Judas Cradle also has its spiritual successor in the modern judicial system. In some countries, enhanced interrogation techniques, those methods aimed at creating extreme fear and psychological collapse, are, to some extent, modern variants of the Judas Cradle. This reminds us that the progress of civilization requires continuous efforts and vigilance. When we stand in front of the glass display case of the museum and look at this rusty metal cone, perhaps we should think not only about the curiosity of the past, but also about the reflection of the present. Have those cruelties that were once considered necessary and those atrocities in the name of justice really disappeared with time? Or do they just continue to exist with a different face? The story of the Judas Cradle tells us that human beings have both amazing creativity and terrible cruel instincts. And the meaning of civilization may be to use the former to restrain the latter. From torture instruments to exhibits, from fear to jokes, this transformation process itself is worth pondering. But then again, compared to the Judas Cradle, which pursues instant pleasure, the medieval people were also proficient in the torture method of slow work and fine work. For example, the Spanish donkey, to be introduced next, can make people experience continuous sourness. for up to 72 hours. In the golden age of torture in the Middle Ages in Europe, which was full of creativity, when the executioners felt that the conventional whipping and burning were too monotonous, they invented a unique punishment for prisoners to ride a donkey. However, this donkey is a bit special. Its saddle is a sharp blade, and the riding time may be up to 72 hours uninterrupted. Welcome to the horror world of Spanish donkey, where you can experience the ultimate version of riding a donkey to watch the script, wait and see. This Spanish donkey is essentially a wooden tripod with a sharp metal blade installed on the top. The prisoner was forced to sit astride the device, with weights tied to his feet to increase downward pressure. Imagine a blade facing your perineum, the weight of your whole body pressed on it, and 2 iron balls hung on it. This is probably the most painful horse riding training in history. The Inquisition particularly liked this torture device because it perfectly met their needs. It was not immediately fatal, convenient for long interrogations, and could cause maximum pain, promote confession. Some upgraded versions would also apply salt or chili oil on the blade, or let the guards shake the device from time to time to ensure that the prisoner could not adjust his posture to relieve the pain. The best thing is that this punishment was often carried out in public, so that the onlookers could hear the prisoner's heart-wrenching screams. The medieval version of a warning education film. Let's follow the perspective of a fictional prisoner, Pierre, and experience this 72-hour riding experience in its entirety. On the first morning, Pierre was dragged out of the dungeon roughly. Before his eyes could adjust to the sunlight, he was stripped of all his clothes. "Today I will teach you how to ride a donkey," the executioner said with a smile. "This is a treatment only for nobles." 2 strong men lifted Pierre and slowly placed him on the triangular wooden frame like a piece of furniture. Aligned, the executioner carefully adjusted Pierre's position to ensure that his perineum was just against the blade that was shining with cold light. Pierre felt a sharp pain, and before he could react, the guards had already started to tie heavy iron balls to his ankles. 20 pounds each, the executioner explained. This is the standard configuration. If you perform well, you can upgrade to the 50-pound deluxe version tomorrow. At noon, the sun shone directly on the execution ground. Pierre had been riding for 3 hours, and sweat mixed with blood flowed down the wooden frame. The blade had cut the epidermis, but what was more terrifying was that he could feel the metal penetrating into his muscle tissue little by little. The executioners went to lunch, leaving him alone to continue this one-man equestrian performance. In the evening, Pierre began to hallucinate. He seemed to see his childhood self running in the fields, but in reality, his lower body was being slowly cut in half. Among the onlookers, a woman covered her eyes but peeked through her fingers. A businessman ate bread while commenting on the execution technique, and a few children imitated Pierre's painful expression and played games. At dawn the next day, Pierre's voice was hoarse. The executioner kindly sprinkled a handful of salt on his wound. "Stay awake, my friend. It's only been 24 hours. The salt grains made a slight sizzling sound on the wound, and Pierre's body twitched violently, but he couldn't break free because of the weight of the iron ball. His thigh muscles began to spasm involuntarily, which made the blade cut deeper. At noon on the 3rd day, Pierre's consciousness had begun to blur. He could feel his pelvis being slowly separated, like a piece of roast meat being cut precisely. Flies circled around his wound, but he no longer had the strength to drive them away. The executioner was explaining to the onlookers, "Look, now the blade has touched the ischium, and below is the rectum." In the evening, Pierre finally got freed. His body was neatly cut in half like a specimen in anatomy class. The executioner recorded with satisfaction. The total time was 68 hours, setting a new record this month. The guards began to dismantle the torture device and prepare for tomorrow's performance. The crowd dispersed with reluctance, discussing how wonderful today's performance was. Today, this terrifying torture device has become a cultural symbol. In Game of Thrones, it appears as a representative of the most cruel punishment. In the game Assassin's Creed, it is a chilling decoration in the background. In modern slang, riding a donkey has become a vivid metaphor for being in a dilemma. In medical history, The records it left behind help researchers understand the situation of ancient trauma infection. The most ironic thing is that in some areas of Spain, there is now a children's wooden horse toy called Spanish donkey, but the blade has been replaced with a soft cushion. This is probably the best proof of the progress of human civilization. From torture to toys, from fear to entertainment, this transformation process itself is worth pondering. Spanish donkey is not only a torture instrument, but also a sophisticated power display device. It embodies the creative violence of the judicial system at that time, turning public execution into a means of social control. Long-term torture is more deterrent than quick execution. It perfectly blurs the boundary between interrogation and punishment, making the prisoner completely collapse in a state of wanting to live but not wanting to die. In modern society, although this naked physical punishment has disappeared, the spiritual legacy of Spanish donkey still exists in various forms. Stress postures in certain interrogations, psychological torture caused by long-term detention, social death caused by public opinion trials. When we see these torture instruments in museums today, in addition to curiosity, we should also think, under the cloak of civilization, how much has the cruelty of human beings to their own kind changed? If the Spanish donkey is a representative of the slow art of the Middle Ages, which emphasizes endurance and precision, then the breaking wheel, to be introduced next, is a model of violent art. The medieval human hot wheels will make your bones sing a symphony of crackling. In the golden age of torture in the Middle Ages in Europe, when executioners found conventional burnings and hangings too boring, they invented a unique punishment that made prisoners play roulette. However, this roulette is a bit special. It will not give you money, but will only make your bones make a crisp, clicking sound. Welcome to the horrible world of the breaking wheel, where you can experience the ultimate version of being torn to pieces. This thing that sounds like a circus prop is actually one of the most popular death penalty tools in the Middle Ages. Its design concept is simple and crude. Use an oversized wooden wheel to tie the prisoner to it, and then use an iron rod or hammer to break his bones one by one. Starting from the leg bones to the arms and finally to the ribs, it is like playing a bone symphony. The whole process is as rigorous as a Michelin chef handling ingredients, except that this dish will scream and bleed. The breaking wheel can be traced back to ancient Greece, but it was truly developed in medieval Europe, especially in France and Germany. This punishment has been developed into an art. Professional executioners must undergo rigorous training and master precise striking techniques to ensure that every bone is broken just right, and to keep the prisoner alive as long as possible. Some wheel-breaking masters can even control the survival of prisoners for more than 3 days, which can be called the medieval version of life support experts. Let us follow the perspective of the fictional prisoner Pierre and experience this bone concert in its entirety. At dawn, Pierre was dragged out of the dungeon. Before his eyes could adapt to the sunlight, he was roughly stripped of his clothes. "Today I will teach you a new game," the executioner said with a smile. "I guarantee you will never forget it." The two assistants tied Pierre to the upright wooden wheel in a big shape like playing with a rag doll. First movement, calf. The executioner raised the iron rod like a conductor and hit Pierre's right calf accurately. Crack! The sound of the tibia breaking was crisp and pleasant. "Good pitch." The executioner nodded with satisfaction, and then the left calf. "It should be as rhythmic as playing a drum," he explained as he struck. "The force should be even and the position should be accurate." Pierre's screams attracted more onlookers. A woman covered her mouth with a handkerchief but stared intently. A vendor took the opportunity to sell snacks and drinks, and a few children imitated Pierre's painful expression and played games. This was simply a medieval version of a reality show. At noon, the performance entered the climax, the thigh bone. "This part needs to be more powerful." The executioner changed to a heavier hammer. Like the timpani in a symphony, each heavy blow was accompanied by Pierre's heart-wrenching screams and the muffled sound of broken bones. The blood flowed along the wheel to the ground, forming a small blood pool. In the evening, the concert came to an end, the rib part. "This is the most technically demanding task," the executioner explained to the audience. "You have to break bones without hurting internal organs. Each of his blows was extremely precise, like a surgeon performing an operation. Pierre could no longer scream and could only utter faint groans. The next morning, Pierre was miraculously still alive. His body was woven between the spokes, like a terrifying work of art. The wheel was erected high for the whole town to see. "This is called wheel display," the executioner explained to the new audience. "If he's lucky, he can live for 2 days." Crows began to circle over Pierre's head, waiting for their meal. Occasionally, a brave crow would swoop down and peck at Pierre's already broken flesh. The scene was both terrifying and weird, like a living picture of hell. At dusk on the 3rd day, Pierre finally got liberation. His life was like a candle in the wind, and after 72 hours of extreme pain, it finally went out. The executioner recorded with satisfaction. "It took 74 hours in total, setting a new record this month. This record will soon be posted in the town square as a proof of judicial authority." Today, this once dreaded torture device has become a cultural symbol. In movies and TV shows such as Game of Thrones, it appears as a representative of the most cruel punishment. In the game The Witcher 3, it is a chilling decoration in the background. In modern medicine, the records it left behind help researchers understand the pathological process of comminuted fractures. The most ironic thing is that this horrible torture device has found rebirth in the amusement park. The English name of the Ferris wheel is said to have a subtle blood relationship with the broken wheel. Imagine that when lovers kiss on the Ferris wheel, they are actually sitting on a modified version of the broken wheel skeleton, which is a bit creepy in romance. The broken wheel is not only a torture device, but also a sophisticated power display device. It embodies the ritualized violence of the judicial system at that time, turning public execution into a means of social control. Long-term torture is more deterrent than quick execution, and it perfectly demonstrates the absolute control of power. In modern society, although this naked physical punishment has disappeared, the spiritual legacy of the breaking wheel still exists in various forms. Is cyber violence a digital version of the breaking wheel? Does workplace bullying count as spiritual bone crushing? Is public opinion trial equivalent to modern public display? When we see these torture instruments in museums today, in addition to curiosity, we should also think about, under the cloak of civilization, how much has the cruelty of human beings to their own kind changed? If the breaking wheel is a representative of the art of violence in the Middle Ages, emphasizing precision and persistence, then the copper bull barbecue to be introduced next is a model of high-temperature quick stir-frying. This punishment of slowly roasting prisoners in the belly of a metal bull raises the pain to a whole new temperature. But this is another horrifying story. In the history of torture in Europe, if we were to select the most artistic killing tool, the bronze bull invented by the ancient Greeks would definitely win the crown. This seemingly elegant bronze sculpture is actually one of the most sophisticated torture instruments in human history. It can not only roast people to death, but also turn screams into pleasant bull roars, which can be called an ancient version of the musical barbecue oven. In the 6th century BC, the tyrant Phalaris of Sicily wanted a both beautiful and practical torture instrument. He found the bronze sculptor Perillos and put forward a perverted request: design a device that can make the prisoner's screams sound like a bull roar. The talented artist racked his brains and finally created a shocking work: a completely hollow bronze bull, whose belly can accommodate an adult, and whose mouth is designed as a natural loudspeaker. The working principle of the bronze bull can be called ancient black technology. 1. The prisoner is stuffed in through the small door in the bull's buttocks. 2. Firewood is lit under the bronze bull. 3. As the temperature rises, the prisoner's screams come out of the bull's mouth through a specially designed pipe. 4. Finally, the prisoner is roasted, and the onlookers enjoy a bull symphony. Ironically, it is said that in order to test the effect, Phalaris first stuffed the designer Perillos in. This poor artist became the first experienced officer of his own work, and used his life to interpret what you deserve it. Let us follow the perspective of the fictional prisoner Dimitri and experience this horrific food tour. In the early morning, Dimitri was stripped naked and dragged to the center of the square like a lamb to be slaughtered. The bronze bull gleamed in the sun and looked like a fine work of art. "Go in," the jailer said with a smile. "This is the VIP box that the tyrant prepared for you." Dmitri was forced into the bull's belly. The bronze door slammed shut, and darkness enveloped him in an instant. He could smell the metal and the burnt smell left by the previous guest. The priests outside began to chant, the firewood was lit, and the flames licked the bottom of the bronze bull. At first it was just warm, like taking a hot bath, but soon the copper walls began to heat up. Dmitri slapped the inner wall, and his screams came out through the carefully designed pipes, turning into a low moo sound. The nobles watching were amused. "Listen, the bull is singing." Half an hour later, the bronze bull had turned into a huge oven. Dmitri's skin began to blister, and the sweat evaporated as soon as it seeped out. Every breath he took burned his lungs, like inhaling fire. The screams became weaker and weaker, but the acoustic design of the bronze bull still made the loud bull roar. An hour later, the sound of fat dripping came from the bull's belly, mixed with the aroma of barbecue drifting in the air. The chef professionally judged the heat. "It will be perfect in another quarter of an hour." The nobles began to bet on when Dmitri would stop singing. When the bronze bull was red all over, the chef announced, "It's well cooked and ready to be taken out of the oven." The small door on the bull's butt was opened, and a charred and curled corpse slid out, like a piece of charcoal with a unique shape. The onlookers gave warm applause. This concert was really wonderful. The vitality of this bronze bull is much stronger than its victim. After the fall of Phalaris, it began its own traveling exhibition. In the Roman period, it was exhibited in various provinces as a high-tech torture device. In the Middle Ages, it became the artifact that alchemists dreamed of. In the Renaissance, it appeared in Dante's Divine Comedy Inferno. In modern society, it became a full-scale replica collected by the Art Institute of Chicago, appeared as an important prop in the TV series Hannibal, and also became the source of inspiration for the concert stage design of the heavy metal band Slayer. Not only that, some restaurants in Italy even launched the Copper Bull barbecue specialty. Of course, it is grilled steak. The most ironic thing is that the acoustic principle of the Copper Bull was later used in the architectural design of the Opera House. Those wonderful sound effects that made the audience intoxicated were inspired by the screams of the tortured. The bronze bull left us not only a curious story, but also an eternal fable about human nature and power. First of all, from the perspective of technical aesthetics, the tradition of packaging cruelty as art has never disappeared since ancient times. Then, from the perspective of the onlooker's economy, ancient nobles paid to watch executions, and modern people watch disaster scenes by watching short videos. Then, from the perspective of sound engineering, from torture instruments to opera houses, the good or evil of technology depends on the user. Finally, from the perspective of culinary philosophy, the concept of circular economy that uses enemy fat as fuel can still be seen in war propaganda. Today's bronze bull exists in a more hidden form. Internet violence is like an invisible bronze bull oven. Workplace PUA is a slow-cooked spiritual cooking. Public opinion trial is a fire that is made by everyone. The enhanced interrogation technology of some countries is simply a modern version of the bronze bull. When we enjoy bronze bull barbecue in a high-end restaurant, few people will think of the dark history behind this dish. Perhaps civilization is the process of learning to turn cruelty into a joke. If the bronze bull is the representative of high-temperature cooking, then the squeezer to be introduced next is a model of cold-pressed juice extraction. This device, made of heavy wood and screws, can squeeze the human body like a lemon to slowly squeeze out the juice, making death come slowly and methodically. In the golden age of torture in the Middle Ages in Europe, which was full of creativity, when executioners were tired of the blood-spattering scenes and began to pursue a more elegant way of execution, a horrifying torture device came into being: the squeezer. This device, composed of heavy oak boards and huge iron screws, can be called a medieval version of the human juicer, specially tailored for those who like to take their time and do fine work. The design concept of the squeezer is simple and almost elegant. Use mechanical force to slowly and continuously compress the human body until every bone groans in surrender. This seemingly bulky device actually contains a precise, violent aesthetic. Two 3-inch thick oak boards ensure that the pressure is evenly distributed. For iron screws with a diameter of 6 centimeters provide stable compression force. A carefully designed crank handle makes the execution process full of ritual. Optional spiked pads prepare surprises for particularly stubborn prisoners. Unlike those torture devices that pursue quick results, the charm of the squeezer lies in its gentleness. It will not kill you immediately, but like a patient masseur, it will slowly help you relax every muscle and adjust every bone. The whole process may last for several hours, giving the prisoner plenty of time to reflect on his crime. Let's follow the perspective of the fictional prisoner Pierre and experience this suffocating bone symphony. Pierre was stripped down to a pair of linen shorts and laid flat on the lower wooden board like a piece of dough to be processed. His limbs were fixed at the 4 corners to ensure that the pressure was evenly distributed. "Don't be nervous," the executioner said kindly. "We just want to do a full body check." As the crank began to turn, the upper wooden board slowly descended. The initial pressure was like a heavy elephant gently stepping on the chest. Crack! Pierre's ribs made the first protest. The executioner nodded with satisfaction. "Good sound. Continue." The pressure continued to increase, and Pierre's breathing became rapid and difficult. His eyeballs began to bulge out like a bottle cork about to pop out of his eye socket. Crack! This time it was the pelvis that joined the protest. Someone in the crowd began to record the order and sound of various bone fractures. When the screw was turned to the 18th turn, Pierre's tongue spit out uncontrollably, like a dried salted fish. His internal organs began to play Jenga, and his bladder was the first to raise the white flag of surrender. The executioner took out his pocket watch and looked at it. Good progress, 10 minutes faster than the last one. As the last half turn of the screw was turned, Pierre's body was like a squeezed lemon, and human essence, mixed with broken bones, oozed out from the edge of the wooden board. The executioner professionally assessed, "The purity is very high, and there are almost no large pieces of tissue left." This once dreaded torture device now exists in our lives in various disguised forms. In the Middle Ages in Europe, when even the death penalty had to be ritualistic, when the executioners found that simple hanging was too boring and burning was too wasteful of firewood, they invented a luxurious punishment package that combined sauna, exhibition, and slow cooking, hanging cage punishment. This seemingly simple iron cage can turn the death penalty into a survival reality show that lasts for weeks or even months, allowing the prisoner to slowly turn into a dried specimen in full view of the public. Imagine a cage made of fine iron, just big enough for an adult to curl up in, hanging in the most conspicuous position in the town square. The prisoner is locked in it like a live poultry for sale in a supermarket, enjoying the sun bath, wind and rain, and the pointing and talking of passers-by. This is not some performance art, but the most popular long-term death penalty execution plan in medieval Europe. The French call it bird in a cage, the Germans call it Iron Cradle, and the Italians romantically name it prisoner in the sky. Hearing these names, those who don't know may think it is some kind of new tourism project. Let's follow the perspective of the unlucky thief Jean and experience the first day of this open-air survival challenge. In the early morning, Jean was stripped of only a rag and stuffed into this iron cage with a diameter of less than 1 meter like a suitcase. "Don't worry," the jailer comforted him kindly. "It will be a bit crowded at first, but it will be comfortable after you lose weight." With the creaking sound of the lifting device, the iron cage slowly rose to a height of 10 meters on the outer wall of the church. Jean's first reaction was fear of heights, and his second reaction was that there were spikes at the bottom of the iron cage. It turned out that the designer had long expected that the prisoners would want to sit and be lazy, and specially installed upward iron spikes at the bottom of the cage to ensure that you can only maintain an elegant curled posture. The midday sun shone directly on the iron cage, and the metal bars quickly became hot. The place where Jean's skin touched the iron bars began to sizzle, and a wisp of barbecue aroma wafted out. The bakery owner below sniffed the air, turned to his apprentice and said, "Go ask the executioner if the cage can be hung farther away from our shop. The customers are scared away." In the afternoon, a sudden rainstorm made Jean experience the pleasure of boiling a person alive. The iron cage cooled quickly, but the rain accumulated 5 centimeters deep at the bottom of the cage, and Jean had to stand on tiptoe between the spikes like a drowned chicken. The worst thing was that the passing children threw stones at him to play whack-a-mole. On the 3rd day, Jean began to show symptoms of dehydration. His tongue swelled like a thick carpet, and his lips were cracked with blood. The kind nuns would regularly hold the water bag on a long pole and hand it to him, but only a small sip each time. After all, this performance would last a long time, and he couldn't leave too soon. On the 7th day, Jean's skin began to peel off due to sunburn, like a worn leather jacket. A passing noble lady covered her nose with a handkerchief and said to her husband, "Dear, look at the person in the cage. Is his skin color the latest popular bronze color?" Half a month later, Jean's cage welcomed a group of special visitors, crows. These smart birds soon discovered that this iron cage was a buffet that never ran out of food. They would accurately peck at Jean's necrotic tissue, but carefully avoid vital parts, and they were the most professional surgeons. Jean could no longer feel the pain, and he even started chatting with the crows, although the other party would only answer quack. After a month, Jean's weight had dropped by half, and from a distance he looked like a skeleton specimen used in anatomy class hanging in the cage. The city officials began to consider whether to move him to a more conspicuous position because the exhibit had shrunk a bit. The best thing about the hanging cage punishment is its sustainability. An iron cage can be used for decades, and you only need to replace the exhibit regularly. Some historic cages have even become city landmarks. Tour guides will introduce to tourists, "Look, this cage once held the famous robber Jack, who lasted 58 days in it before he died, setting a record in the city." Tourists will excitedly take photos to commemorate the moment, completely forgetting that it was once a living person. This variant of punishment is also very creative. In Venice, the prisoner's cage will be hung on the water level at high tide, so that you can jump back and forth on the edge of drowning. In some areas of Germany, the cage will be made into a couple's box to lock 2 people at a time. And the most perverted version is the French rotating cage, where the executioner will rotate the cage regularly to ensure that the prisoner's body is evenly heated. These designs all reflect the medieval people's spirit of torture research and development of life is endless. Creativity is endless. Time flies, and the cage punishment has long since withdrawn from the stage of history, but its spiritual legacy is still active in contemporary society. Isn't today's celebrity gossip another form of hanging cage for public display? The paparazzi's lens is like the iron cage of the year, exposing the most unbearable side of celebrities to the public. Social media is a huge digital cage, where we voluntarily put our most private life fragments for people to watch. Although modern people are not imprisoned in a physical iron cage, who can say that they have completely escaped the invisible display cage? From another perspective, hanging cage punishment has accidentally promoted progress in certain fields. For example, the developers of modern sunscreen have studied the sunburn cases of prisoners in medieval hanging cages. Outdoor survival experts have summarized the data of human endurance limits from these cases. Even the suspension training system in the gym can see the shadow of the hanging cage, but now people voluntarily pay to hang themselves up. The most profound irony of hanging cage punishment is that it turns death into a long performance, and the audience gradually forgets that it is a life that is about to disappear in numbness. When we see those rusty old iron cages in the museum, in addition to curiosity, perhaps we should also think, is today's online violence and public opinion trials really that different from the hanging cages in the Middle Ages? If the cage torture shows the art of torture from the outside to the inside, then the water torture to be introduced next has created the from the inside to the outside suffocation aesthetics. This seemingly mild punishment allows prisoners to experience countless near-death pleasures on the boundary between liquid and air, turning drowning into a long symphony. In the Middle Ages in Europe, when even bathing was considered a dangerous behavior, the nobles invented an ingenious water therapy method. But the guests who received the service usually did not survive the end of the treatment. Water torture, a punishment that sounds like a hot spring vacation, is actually a symphony of suffocation that makes prisoners repeatedly wander between drowning and gasping. Imagine, you are tied to the rack with a wet cloth covering your head, and the executioner elegantly pours water on your face like a bartender mixing a cocktail, allowing you to experience the wonderful feeling of about to die but not completely dead dozens of times. The Spanish Inquisition was so proficient in this technique that they even developed a water torture luxury package. The basic version uses ordinary cold water, the premium version adds ice cubes or pepper water, and the VIP package is also used with a branding iron, allowing you to experience the pleasure of ice and fire. The most amazing thing is that this set of punishments will hardly leave any external injuries, and the victims will look as peaceful as sleeping after death, if you ignore the water in their lungs and distorted facial expressions. Let's follow the perspective of the heretic Garcia and experience this underwater escape magic show. In the early morning, Garcia was stripped of his shirt and tied to a tilted rack with his feet higher than his head. "Relax," the executioner said kindly. "We are just helping you cleanse your soul." A piece of burlap suddenly covered his face, and before he could react, the first bucket of ice water had been poured down. Garcia's nasal cavity was instantly filled with water. He instinctively wanted to cough, but found that more water was pouring into his mouth. 1, 2, 3. The executioner counted to 10 seconds before stopping. Garcia gasped for air like a stranded fish, but before he could get enough air, the second wave of water came again. This time, the water was added with some spice. Chili powder made his respiratory tract feel as if it was burned by fire. "Look, how beautiful his neck is with bulging veins," the bishop commented to the noble beside him. "It's like a living anatomy diagram." In the fifth round, Garcia's instinct for survival and desire for death began to fight fiercely. His body twisted wildly to break free, but the thought of "it's better to die quickly" flashed through his mind. The worst thing was that the executioner seemed to be able to read his mind and always stopped at the moment when he was about to faint. "We don't want a guest who fainted," the executioner said while wiping his hands. "Then no one will enjoy the next show." In the 10th round, Garcia could no longer distinguish between reality and illusion. He saw the scene of his childhood playing by the river, but was suddenly splashed back to reality by a bucket of ice water. "Don't be distracted," the executioner shook his head. "The main event has just begun." The assistant brought a special funnel and inserted it directly into Garcia's throat. "This is our signature drink," the executioner said as he poured water into it. "I guarantee that you will be full." Garcia's stomach swelled up like a balloon, and a dull sound of water was heard when he tapped it gently. The executioner suddenly jumped up and stepped hard on his stomach, and Garcia immediately sprayed water from his mouth and nose like a fountain. "Beautiful!" The onlookers applauded and cheered, and some even opened a bet to guess how high the next spray would be. This human fountain show lasted until Garcia began to vomit blood, and at this time it had only been 2 hours since the punishment began. For professional water torture, this was not even a warm-up. The most exquisite thing about water torture is its customizability. The gentle interrogator will let you stop every time until you are almost at the limit, enjoying the process of slowly destroying your will. The impatient one likes to play the flash mob mode, allowing you to experience the feeling of near death dozens of times in a short period of time. Some innovators also add ingredients to the water. Salt can prolong the pain, vinegar can increase irritation, and urine can bring mental humiliation. The Spanish even invented seawater torture, using the rising and falling tides to let prisoners repeatedly experience the pleasure of drowning. This is the real ocean paradise. Time flows to the modern era, and water torture has not only not disappeared, but has evolved into more forms. The CIA has modernized this ancient technology and developed a water torture 2.0 version. It is always indispensable in the interrogation scenes in Hollywood movies. Even the breath-holding exercises in swimming training classes can see its shadow, but now people try it voluntarily and some people pay for it. Even more ironic is that the mild version of water torture can be seen everywhere in contemporary society. Cyber violence is like an invisible wet cloth covering the victim's mouth and nose. Workplace PUA makes people jump back and forth between hope and despair. Mortgage pressure is like a funnel that is constantly filled with water, making people feel on the verge of drowning every day. When we are swiping our phones to read the encyclopedia introduction of water torture, do we realize that we are being drowned by the torrent of information? From another perspective, waterboarding has accidentally promoted certain medical developments. Modern drowning first aid technology draws on research data from waterboarding. Diving medicine's understanding of hypoxia reactions comes partly from these cruel experiments. Even the psychology theory of intermittent reinforcement can be found in waterboarding. It's like using the label on a poison bottle to develop an antidote. The darkest means giving birth to the brightest knowledge. The most profound irony of waterboarding is that it turns the most basic need of life breathing into a tool of torture. When we practice holding our breath in the swimming pool and enjoy the steam in the sauna, have we ever thought that there is only a fragile layer of civilized coat between these daily pleasures and extreme pain? If water torture shows the art of suffocation from the inside out, then the starvation punishment to be introduced next has created the from slow to fast consumption aesthetics. This punishment, which locks prisoners in special cells and slowly starves them to death, turns the human body into a precise energy consumption timer, allowing death to be accurately calculated like the sand in an hourglass. In the Middle Ages in Europe, when even bread was distributed according to class, the nobles invented an ultimate solution for prisoners to diet and lose weight: starvation punishment. This is not a health treatment, but a death countdown accurate to calories. Imagine. You are locked in a special cell, watching the jailer feast in front of you through the iron bars every day, and your body is melting slowly and surely like a candle. The Venetians call it a slimming suite, the French nobles call it silent therapy, and the Germans simply call it a hungry ghost maker. It sounds like some kind of trendy kitchen appliance. The subtlety of this punishment lies in its scientific accuracy. Although medieval jailers didn't know what basal metabolic rate was, they knew clearly that an adult male could usually live 40 to 60 days without eating anything. So they developed a whole set of hunger packages. The basic version was no food at all. The standard version was a bowl of water every day. The deluxe version occasionally gave some moldy bread crusts to make this death game more up and down. The most perverted one was the visual starvation punishment, where prisoners would be tied to the dining table and watch others enjoy the feast without being allowed to touch it. This was simply the medieval version of eating broadcast torture. Let's follow the perspective of political prisoner Marco and experience this calorie-burning competition. On the first day of imprisonment, Marco was still locked in an ordinary cell and even had a bowl of thick soup and half a loaf of bread for dinner. "Enjoy it," the jailer winked. "You'll be on a diet starting tomorrow." The next morning, Marco was transferred to a special round cell, the walls of which were engraved with the counting marks of previous residents, like some kind of terrifying calendar. There was an iron cage in the middle of the cell with freshly baked bread in it, and the aroma filled the entire space like poison gas. "This is to help you remember the taste of food," the jailer explained. "We are very considerate." In the first week, Marco's stomach protested like an angry boxer. He counted the orthographic marks on the wall and guessed how many days of suffering each stroke represented. In the second week, he began to hallucinate, thinking that stones were cheese and straw was pasta. The cruelest thing was that every morning, the jailer would deliberately fry bacon outside his cell door, and the sound of grease bursting was like the devil's laughter. In the third week, Marco's ribs were clearly countable, and his skin stuck to his bones like parchment. He began to understand why someone carved on the 38th day, "I bit my own finger on the wall," because it really looked delicious. By the fourth week, Marco's body entered energy-saving mode. His heartbeat slowed down and his body temperature dropped, like a machine with insufficient power. The jailer began to measure his arm circumference every day, like a farmer assessing the meat yield of livestock. "If you get thinner, you can be a model for the church's stained glass," the jailer recorded with satisfaction. "Keep working hard." The most ironic thing is that on the day when Marco was about to die, the warden suddenly announced that he had been pardoned. This joke made Marco roll his eyes with his last strength. The variants of starvation punishment are as rich and colorful as medieval cuisine. Venice's lifting package will adjust the speed of starvation according to the prisoner's identity. Nobles will starve slower. Civilians will starve faster. France's couple box will lock two prisoners together to test humanity to the end. And Germany's scientific experiment version has doctors record various physical data every day, turning death row prisoners into living experimental materials. These innovations all reflect the medieval people's persistence in precising pain. Time flows to the modern era, and the ghost of starvation punishment still wanders around us. The buy one get one free promotional labels in supermarkets are very similar to the bread temptations of the past. The body fat scales in the gym are the measurement tools of the jailers. Various weight loss recipes read like the operating manuals of starvation. We voluntarily enter this invisible cage, except that the jailers are replaced by the number of likes on social media. From another perspective, starvation has accidentally promoted the development of science. Modern nutrition research on fasting reactions is partly derived from these cruel records. Aerospace medicine's data on long-term hunger refer to these cases. Even the popularity of intermittent fasting can be found in the prototype of starvation. It's like using the instructions for torture instruments to reversely deduce health guidelines. And the darkest means have given birth to the brightest knowledge. The most profound irony of starvation is that it turns the most basic need of life, eating, into the cruelest torture. When we look at the menu in a restaurant and struggle to choose which dish to choose, or throw away expired food in a convenience store, have you ever thought that there is only a thin layer of social contract between these daily troubles and extreme pain? If starvation punishment shows the art of consumption from the inside out, then the lead drop punishment, to be introduced next, has created the aesthetics of penetration from point to surface. This punishment, which allows molten lead drops to slowly penetrate the skull, turns death into a liquid clock that is accurate to the drop, and makes life gradually disappear with the fall of each drop of metal. In the Renaissance, an era when art and cruelty coexisted, when the executioners were tired of simple and crude beheading and burning at the stake, a punishment with a strong craftsman spirit came into being: the lead drop punishment. This is not a romantic metal craft class, but a cranial SPA that allows molten lead drops to slowly drip into the brain from the top of the head. Imagine, you are firmly fixed on a special rack, and there is a carefully calibrated lead water drip directly above your head. A drop of hot metal liquid falls every 10 minutes, like the most patient sculptor, slowly chiseling a perfect round hole in your skull. The Venetians gave this punishment a poetic name, angel's tears. The Germans called it brain hole maker directly, and the French nobles used it as an entertainment program during afternoon tea, enjoying macarons while admiring the elegant arc of the lead drops falling. The subtlety of this punishment lies in its progressive destruction concept. The first drop of lead will cause blistering on the scalp, the 10th drop will begin to burn the skull, and the 100th drop will finally touch the brain. The whole process may take a full 3 days, giving the prisoner plenty of time to reflect on his life choices. Let us follow the perspective of Luca, a suspect of treason, and experience this heavy metal skull concert. On the first morning, Luca was tied to a tilted torture chair, with a copper pot filled with molten lead hanging above his head. The small hole at the bottom of the pot was slightly thicker than a needle tip. "Relax," the executioner said gently. "We are just going to open a small window on your head." As the first drop of lead fell, Luca let out a heart-wrenching scream, and the vendors around the execution ground immediately began to sell earplugs. "This is just the beginning," the executioner comforted him while recording. "When the lead drops to the brain, you will see interesting hallucinations." By noon, a perfect round eschar had formed on Luca's scalp, like a stubbed cigarette. In the interval between each drop of lead, the executioner would considerately use a feather fan to cool him down and measure the diameter of the eschar. "The diameter is 1.3 centimeters, he recorded like a Michelin judge. "The degree of charring is just right." The most ironic thing is that a noble lady in the crowd was impressed by this precise craftsmanship and customized a set of lead drop jewelry from the executioner on the spot. The next day, the lead drops began to erode Luca's skull. Each drop of metal made a slight hissing sound when it fell, accompanied by a wisp of green smoke and the aroma of roasted bone marrow. The executioner specially prepared a mirror so that Luca could appreciate the process of his skull gradually turning red and thinning. "Look," he said like an art professor. "Your skull is turning into the most beautiful amber." Luca had entered a state of transcendence and even began to discuss with the executioner which drop of lead had the perfect temperature. At dawn on the third day, as the 127th drop of lead fell, Luca's dura mater was finally penetrated. The strange thing was that at this moment he felt not pain, but a strange coolness. Aha! The executioner clapped his hands excitedly. Now the lead drop can talk directly to your brain. Luca suddenly began to recite poetry in his childhood dialect, which was a sign that his frontal lobe was being cooked. The students watching hurriedly took out their notebooks to record this rare, brain science live teaching. The most horrifying variant of the lead drop punishment is the musical lead drop. Different purity lead will produce different tones, and the executioner can play simple melodies on the prisoner's head by adjusting the formula. A Milanese executioner who loved opera even used this method to play the entire Ave Maria, although the prisoner died in the third bar. Another creative version is flavored lead dripping, adding spices to the molten lead to make the execution process emit the aroma of cinnamon or lavender, which can be regarded as the earliest aromatherapy. Time flows to the modern era, and the spirit of lead-dripping punishment continues in various forms. The silver mercury fillings of dentists remind people of the dripping metal. The movement trajectory of the nozzle of 3D printers is exactly the same as that of lead dripping. Even the slow extraction process of coffee dripping carries a familiar cruel poetry. Isn't the slow erosion that is everywhere in our daily lives mortgage pressure, work anxiety, emotional torture, another form of lead-dripping punishment? It's just that what drips now is no longer molten lead, but bank bills, bosses' emails, and unread messages. From the perspective of scientific history, lead-dripping punishment accidentally promoted many developments. The modern neurosurgery skull drilling technology refers to the data of lead drops. Metal smelting technology has obtained valuable parameters from these experiments. Even the psychological research on pain tolerance has benefited from these cruel records. It's like using the instructions for torture instruments to reverse the medical textbooks, and the hellish practice has given birth to heavenly knowledge. The most profound irony of lead dripping is that it turns the most delicate organ of human beings, the brain, into a display stand for metal crafts. When we watch the drip coffee slowly fall in the cafe, and when we appreciate the exquisite silver jewelry in the jewelry store, have you ever thought that there is only a thin curtain of time between these beautiful things and cruel punishment? If the lead-dripping punishment shows the vertical art of from top to bottom, then the sawing punishment to be introduced next has created the horizontal aesthetics of from bottom to top. This punishment of hanging the prisoner upside down and sawing him in half from the crotch turned the human body into a processing object in the lumber mill, and turned death into a rhythmic woodworking performance. In the Middle Ages in Europe, when even carpenters could work part-time as executioners, when the nobles were tired of traditional burnings and hangings, a new type of entertainment full of craftsman spirit came into being: sawing. This is not a furniture DIY workshop, but a human wood processing show that saws a living person in half. Imagine. You are hung upside down at the gate of the city, and two strong men use a special big saw to start from your crotch and slowly move towards your head like sawing wood. The Germans call this human body segmentation. The Italians romantically call it the birth of Venus. And the French nobles use it as an entertainment program at picnics, eating cheese while beating the rhythm of the saw. The inspiration for this punishment is said to come from the daily operations of the lumber mill, except that the pine wood is replaced by living people. Its subtlety lies in the concept of slow work and fine work. The professional execution team can keep the prisoner awake until the chest is sawed, and the whole process may last more than an hour. In order to make the performance more enjoyable, the executioners will deliberately choose saws with larger tooth pitches, so that every time they pull, they can hear the crunch sound of bones being ground, just like chewing a baguette. The most popular is the double sawing method, in which the two executioners show perfect tacit cooperation between pushing and pulling like performing acrobatics. Let us experience this lifetime split experience from the perspective of the unfortunate horse thief Hans. In the early morning, Hans was stripped naked and hung upside down on the bracket at the city gate. All the blood rushed to his head, making his face swell like a ripe tomato. "Don't worry," the executioner patted his butt affectionately. "We will start sawing from the least important part." When the first saw teeth bit into the inner thigh, Hans' scream startled the crows in the nearby trees. The children watching immediately began to imitate his expression, and the adults placed bets on when he would pass out. 1, 2, 3, pull. 1, 2, 3, push, the executioners shouted, and the saw steadily moved towards Hans' abdomen. Miraculously, with the secretion of a large amount of adrenaline, Hans began to feel no pain. Instead, he watched his internal organs being exposed to the air bit by bit like a curious bystander. "Look," he could even joke. "The color of my intestines is much better than the mayor's curtains." This black humor made the onlookers laugh so hard that some even suggested that Hans should be awarded the Best Performance of the Year award. When the saw reached his chest, Hans was finally freed. His two halves were hung on both sides of the city gate like exhibits, with the left side looking to the right and the right side looking to the left, forming a strange symmetrical beauty. A passing merchant praised, "This cut is neater than the wooden boards in my closet." The city magistrate seriously considered whether to include this execution method in the city tourism guide. The most popular variation of sawing is the couple package. Two prisoners are tied together back to back and sawed. Buy one, get one free, economical and affordable. Some creative executioners will also smear honey on the saw to attract ants to help clean the wound. Even more perverted is the musical sawing, which plays folk tunes according to the rhythm of the saw, turning death into a concert. It is said that an executioner who loves opera can perfectly reproduce the rhythm of the magic flute with sawing. Today, the spiritual legacy of sawing can still be seen everywhere. The electric saws of orthopedic surgeons remind people of the terrible teeth. The tools used by woodworking enthusiasts are strikingly similar to medieval torture instruments. Even the abdominal will training in the gym has a familiar push-pull rhythm. Aren't all the various divisions in modern society work-life balance, switching of personality masks, and fragmentation of time management another form of sawing? It's just that what is sawed now is no longer the body, but our time and soul. From the perspective of medical history, sawing accidentally promoted the development of surgery. Many techniques of modern amputation surgery come from the experience of executioners. Part of anatomical knowledge comes from these on-site teachings. Even the progress of anesthesia is thankful for this cruel punishment that requires the prisoner to stay awake. It's like using the instructions for torture instruments to reversely deduce medical papers. The most barbaric practice gave birth to the most civilized science. The most profound irony of sawing is that it reduces the human body, a delicate organism, to a processing material in a lumber mill. When we watch workers in IKEA skillfully sawing wood boards, and when we admire the chefs in the butcher shop accurately cutting steaks, have you ever thought that there is only a thin veil of civilization between these daily scenes and cruel punishments? Standing in front of the glass display case of the museum, looking at those rusty torture instruments, I suddenly realized a weird truth: medieval executioners and modern internet celebrities are essentially doing the same thing, creating unforgettable experiences. It's just that they use Iron Maidens and broken wheels, while we use escape rooms and haunted houses. Those torture instruments that once frightened people have now become the background boards for tourists to take photos with scissor hands. Those heart-wrenching screams have become funny emoticons in our mobile phones. Human suffering eventually becomes entertainment. This sentence is like a blunt knife, slowly cutting through the disguise of civilization. Think about it, we laugh at the barbarity of medieval people, but we have invented more lasting torture methods. Mortgages have to be paid for 30 years, workplace PUA can ruin half a lifetime, and social media makes people live in the judgment of others 24 hours a day. At least the medieval Iron Maiden gave a quick death, while the anxiety of modern society is slow and careful. Those prisoners screaming on the Spanish donkey, and us who work overtime until we collapse late at night, who is happier? When technology eliminated physical pain, humans immediately invented more sophisticated mental torture, workplace cold violence, cyberbullying, emotional manipulation. These invisible torture instruments are silently operating every day. Look at the tourists screaming while riding roller coasters in the amusement park, and their expressions are very similar to those of the medieval crowds who watched hangings. We no longer publicly execute prisoners, but have developed more civilized violent consumption, true crime documentaries, perverted killer peripherals, and disaster live broadcasts. The medieval people at least faced their cruelty honestly, while we use art and entertainment to package the same bloodthirsty desire. The next time you scream in a haunted house, think about the difference between this and the medieval people paying to watch the execution. It's just that our executioners have been replaced by staff wearing cartoon masks. But the most ironic thing is that the direct descendants of these torture instruments are saving lives. The broken will gave birth to orthopedic technology, the Iron Spider inspired surgical robots, and water torture helped study drowning first aid. Humans used the darkest means to accidentally illuminate the brightest knowledge. It's like using an executioner's diary to write a medical textbook. This reminds us that civilization never progresses in a straight line, but spirals upward in the interweaving of good and evil. So the question is, when our descendants look at today's smartphones, social media, and office cubicles, will they be as horrified as we are when we look at the Iron Maiden? What will they list as the 21st century mental torture device? Is it the always online work group, the information cocoon recommended by the algorithm, or the short video app that makes people still scrolling at 3 in the morning? Now it's your turn. What do you think is most like a new torture device in modern society? Is it the 996 work system? Is it the pressure of mortgage loans? Or the weight that can never be reduced? Leave your torture experience in the comment area, and the 3 with the highest likes will receive an ebook of Medieval Hardcore Survival Guide. Don't forget to follow this channel. Next week we will discuss the aesthetics of power in office seating arrangements to see if your workstation is a modern version of shackles for public display. After all, the best way to understand the torture device is to recognize which rack you are lying on.